Sai Deepak. And J Sai Deepak, this was totally against equity, against the basic tenet that everybody is equal before the eyes of law. One section of the society was made the perennial oppressor, the other section the perennial victim. I want to ask you, the cornerstone of these rules, was it just bad drafting, or was there appeasement that was cloaked in these UGC rules?
First thing, the statement that everybody is equal in the eyes of the law does not hold true or valid either in theory or in practice. Because if you have an SC/ST Atrocity Act in place, then the question of everybody being treated equally on the question of discrimination does not exist. Particularly when the court wanted certain safeguards imposed, which were legislated out subsequently in 2018, and the Supreme Court going on to actually endorse even those legislations which went against the safeguards imposed by the Supreme Court, tells you that the concept of equality does not exist either in paper or in reality. Two, in short, these regulations of decent which wanted to become better go to worse, which means the 2012 regulations were decent, but they had a lot of scope for work, including for building safeguards into them, apart from the question of implementation, resulting in petitions of 2019, which too I think should not have been entertained because the dramatists personally were actually mischievous in terms of who was representing. And the basis of those petitions could also have been gone into. But in any case, the Supreme Court only said, come out with a better structure for implementation so that these rules don't remain only symbolic in nature. That's all the Supreme Court said. There was never a move on the part of the Supreme Court or a nudge or a nod on the part of the Supreme Court to say, expand the scope of this or alter the definition. So when the 2025 draft regulations were presented by the government before the Honorable Supreme Court, those regulations were actually better, considering that it had at least 3 or 4 important salient features. One, prosecution for any kind of malicious complaints. Second, you also have adversarial evidence being led by both parties so that people can understand what is going on, who is right and who is wrong. And 3, better representation of all stakeholders on committees as opposed to saying that only certain communities will have representation on those committees. What happened from 2025 to January 2026 is, I think, it's a mystery, but perhaps it's not a mystery, because it appears that the establishment has capitulated to the woke agenda and the casteist narrative being pushed by the other side, unfortunately so, when it should have been vigilant, because it has a direct impact on the productivity of campuses and their contribution to the government's initiatives towards an Atmanirbhar Bharat and nation building. Because if campuses become battlegrounds, and especially elite campuses such as IITs and IIMs, then you have had it. There is no way that you can compete with a China or with an America or anybody else on deep tech, AI or whatever technology, once you start making or you start contributing to fires on campuses. So I'm not going down the path of who they were trying to appease, but if they were trying to appease, it was problematic. If not, they were not vigilant. In either case, it's a problematic situation.
Well, so then let me ask you, when the Supreme Court today said that after 75 years of independence, are we still failing to become a casteless society? Isn't it rhetorical? Because even in this case, though the rules have been stayed now, the casteless society argument doesn't exist in any of the other fields, because there is reservation for SC/ST in jobs, in admissions. So what are we are looking at one side of the picture and not at the other side?
Anybody who brings up the question of a casteless society, I'm sorry to say, I don't know which part of the world they're talking about, because in Bharat, that's not possible. Because every political entity only has contributed to entrenching the identity of caste legally one way or another. Whether or not it remains socially relevant, it becomes legally relevant thanks to the race for jobs in the government sector. We should only hope that we are not talking about and normalizing the conversation with respect to reservation in the private sector, because that's the last bastion left. See, my problem is this. You cannot do away with caste that easily. The better thing to do is to provide redressal for caste discrimination across the board so that nobody feels that one person has a legal leverage and one-upmanship over the other. That is the simple issue here. Unfortunately, despite multiple representations and attempts to try and infuse that sense of balance even in the SC/ST Atrocities Act, it hasn't helped. The UGC regulations of 2026 represents a worse regression from the SC/ST Atrocities Act to the regulations of 2026, which is 2.2 SC/ST Atrocities Act as applied to academic campuses.
Vishnu Shankar Jain, at a time when there are calls that are being made that ek raho, safe raho, and you know, in a way calling on the Hindu society to come join together. Do you think the UGC rules completely struck at the roots of this call towards creating unity?
Navika, actually, I'm very shocked and pained with the entire process, as my learned brother J Sai was also pointing out. This was never the drift of the entire hearing of the Supreme Court. And how this legislation has been enacted, how these regulations have been brought into place is a question which has to be answered by the members of the committee which were part of this. But be that as it may, the point is this: we have to understand that today, what are you providing by way of this present regulation? When SC/ST Act is in operation, if there is any kind of abuse or misuse or any kind of caste-based discrimination, the provisions of SC/ST Act is already in operation, which is taking care of it. A person can go and make his complaint before the police authorities. Amit Kumar's judgment is there of a division bench of the Supreme Court, which says that Section 144 has been clarified and enhanced more further, that such complaints must be registered. Now the point is this, that already Amit Kumar's judgment has appointed a national task force headed by a retired judge of the Supreme Court. SC/ST Act is in operation. UGC regulations 2012 was in operation. So what was the occasion? To exclude the members of one section of the society and paint them as oppressors. And as my brother was rightly pointing out, that there is some kind of woke mentality which is playing out here. We have to understand that in bringing this kind of regulation, there was no empirical data, there was no research, the stakeholders were never consulted, there was no deliberation on these regulations. This definition has been included very mischievously in this regulation, and therefore this was the premise on which we had challenged it before the Honorable Supreme Court.
Well, let me ask J Sai Deepak. J Sai Deepak, RJD national spokesperson Kanchana Yadav has made a statement, and it's on record on social media, that the upper caste deserves to be trapped in fake cases. Do you think this is the undoing of the entire case as it has unfolded?
So let me actually come back to your question, but let me just add to Vishnu's point. I actually disagree with Vishnu, and in a constructive way. There is empirical data under the SC/ST Atrocities Act to show that the number of cases which are actually filed are not much, which result in conviction, which are even significant. Which means, if under the parent mothership legislation you don't have too many cases whatsoever, where was the need to come out with these regulations in the first place? What does that tell you? And my understanding is this, that somebody wanted, and I don't know who that is, which party, in terms of which stakeholder I'm talking about, not of a political party, was interested in presenting a diluted version of that act on campuses. And by dilution, I mean, if the rigors are diluted and they're presented through regulations on campuses, it would be even more susceptible and prone to abuse than the SC/ST Atrocities Act, which is what has happened. That means somebody wanted to introduce a legislation without safeguards and checks and balances, which is overbroad in its catch and excludes one particular community, appropriating the Marxist trope of oppressor and oppressed. And that is the consequence which you see in the form of the UGC regulations of 2026. This should have never happened in the first place. Second, assuming that that spokesperson's statement was her individual opinion, obnoxious, abhorrent, shameful, and downright disgusting. But I genuinely hope that's a sentiment that is not shared by any other community or members of the community. I would hope to the gods in plural that we're not looking at a situation where there are people, and a good cross-section of people, who say, I will spend the rest of my time and my life filing fake cases based on some atrocity literature, as opposed to focusing on building my life positively and as opposed to contributing to nation building in 2026.
You've tweeted earlier and you've said, that the right wing, if it opposes any rules and legislations of the right wing, the argument given is, oh, do you want the Congress back? Do you want 370 back? Did you want the Ram Mandir or not? Do you think somewhere or the other the right-wing narrative as well as unity stands very vulnerable today?
Ma'am, let me say this. There is no right-wing in this country. We have left and the non-left. Okay? Right-wing means having conservative policies either on both on the cultural front and economic front. That's not the situation here. So I don't want to use the word right-wing. I've never associated myself with the right-wing. Point number two. The problem is, even if the establishment is willing to listen, there is a firewall of loyalist trolls and coterie who prevent genuine feedback from reaching out. In the process, they are doing disservice to the establishment itself, and credit goes to members of the non-left because they are capable of standing up to anyone, including the government that they voted for, in defense of principle and position, unlike, let's say, supporters of the Congress, who will even defend the indefensible till the cows come home. Pun intended, of course, they have no respect for cows.
Well, Vishnu Shankar Jain, in the end, I want to ask you, when we go back to the courts on the 19th of March, what are we going to stand for? Because already the other side, in your case, Indira Jaisingh representing them, has already said that the UGC rules can't be seen one-sidedly. They have to be seen in the perspective of the case that has been going on since 2019. So what do we expect in the next hearing?
See, first of all, we have to understand that court reporting these days is happening one-sided. What Indira Jaisingh is saying in the court is there on various, I don't want to name those two platforms, are very nicely quoted. But whatever our arguments are, whatever our submissions are not put forward. So the point is this, that we have given befitting reply before the Honorable Court so far as our submissions are concerned. Now let me tell you, when my friend, my learned friend J Sai was saying, what I mean by empirical data was empirical data so far as the present legislation is concerned. And Navika, let me tell you, when this affidavit of 27th of February was filed by the UGC before the Supreme Court, let me quote you one para. The affidavit says, as paragraph 11 says, that in the present regulation 2020-12 regulations, 1314 complaints have been received, out of which 1276 complaints have been resolved. This was the affidavit by the UGC before the Honorable Supreme Court. So far as data is concerned, you have to show before the Supreme Court when you are trying to enact a particular piece of legislation that in the present campus discrimination is wide rampant on the basis of caste. In Amit Kumar's judgment also, kindly see the stand taken by IIT Delhi. It was concerning the suicide of two students, and it was completely taken. The stand which was taken was that this was not a suicide which happened on the basis of caste discrimination. So you have to understand that what is happening in the campus, and today this issue raked up before the Supreme Court. So in the campuses, ragging is happening. In the campuses, various forms of discrimination is happening. So every form of discrimination has been taken as a caste-based discrimination. So we have to understand that we are looking for an inclusive society, and this kind of piece of legislation will divide the society, will divide the campuses, which is not the theme of the Constitution.
Today, probably we can see smiles on everybody's faces because it is ended well for your side. We don't know. We live and learn what the next test will be and how it will go. But thank you very much, Vishnu Shankar Jain and J Sai Deepak.